Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, my name is Max, and I'm with a group called Take Back the Land, but also with an organization called Movement Catalyst. And we do different things, but complementary things. That's what we think is part of a movement. And Movement Catalyst actually developed, even though it's the nonprofit organization, and it is the one that tries to get funding, and has a bit of a broader range of things that it does, actually came out as a result of Take Back the Land, not the other way around. So just to give you an idea of how the transformation happened or how we move from one into the next, I'm going to show a couple of videos, but just in terms of a big picture ideas, which we'll talk about in detail in a moment, we're trying to build a movement here. And we talk about human rights, we talk about peace. There's no way for these things to happen without some concrete efforts on the ground. And the way those concrete efforts on the ground happen is in two ways. One is we build organizations, and those organizations do the work on the ground. And the second is that those organizations link up to one another, and that's called movement building. And then those movements advance a big agenda. Because there's some things which we can do locally, but there's some things which we just are so big and so global that there's no way that we can move those things locally by themselves. That they have to be linked up to other people doing the exact same thing in other areas. So we're going to start out with some of the work that has happened with Take Back the Land. We started Take Back the Land in October of 2006 in Miami, Florida, and then in 2007 we began the process of dealing with the foreclosure crisis. And then in 2008, we started to become a national network of organizations. And so I'm not going to show you any ones from Miami, but I'll show you a couple of videos that give some idea of what Take Back the Land does, which happened in Rochester, New York. So here go the two videos here.
Well, right now, some of the protesters here are trying to have a little bit of words to say to some of the city officials. They're saying that they could have waited on this till April 5th. But what I want to tell you is that one of the neighbors said, this is not America. This is not what America should be. The house in question is number 9 Ravenwood. It's right down the street here. What happened was Kathy Lennon, her husband died a couple of years ago without a will, so the ownership of the property's kind of been in limbo. She has been working the channels trying to get ownership and thought she had a deal worked out, but she says, and neighbors say, that the agreement with Fannie Mae, which is that federal housing agency that's been the subject of controversy, that they did not wait. And the marshals showed up, the city marshals showed up this morning with all these police officers, and the group called Take Back the Land Rochester that's been staging an eviction watch here for the last week and a half. About 5 of their members were arrested for civil disobedience. They tried to blockade the front of the house. The picture that you just saw of the woman being arrested, a neighbor in pajamas, she was put in handcuffs to be taken down to the police station for just standing on the sidewalk just minutes after I spoke to her.
I have been wrongly justified. These people let me think that they were going to negotiate with me. They came and ambushed me today. My neighbors, everybody's going to jail right now. I don't know what's going on. I'm sick. I don't feel too good. These people ambushed me. I don't know where I'm going. This gentleman said he's going to try to find me somewhere to stay. I don't know what's going on, but I had a home right here that I lived in for years.
It's one of these things that the advocates for the housing say is happening all across the country with this controversy involving Fannie Mae and foreclosing on people's homes. What they're concerned about, Rebecca, is that this home is going to be empty now. It had a family living in it. She was able to make the payments, but the government agency wouldn't accept the payments from her. Now the neighbors are worried that this house might fall into the wrong hands. It might be boarded up, maybe drug dealers, and it's a neighborhood that they have been working very hard to rescue. It is near Thurston Road and Chawley Avenue. It's a very nice neighborhood, and the house looks like it was kept up pretty well, Rebecca.
Well, it sounds like there's still a lot to be worked out on that story, so all right, thanks a lot.
Can I just add one thing? They have been working with Louise Slaughter's office, but maybe getting her involved here a little too late. But Dana Miller, who was a city councilman, lives on the next street over, and neighbors say that he's been sympathetic, but legally his hands apparently are tied by this court-ordered eviction. Well, right now...
All right, don't start the second one yet. Just give it a second. So This was in March of 2011. This was in March of last year. So this was March of last year, and as you saw, we waged an eviction defense for Catherine Lennon. When the police came to do the initial eviction, we blockaded the house and prevented the police from doing so. And that enabled Ms. Lennon to stay in the house for 2 additional weeks. After 2 weeks and the very next day, as you saw in the video, although you didn't see that particular part, the police came at 9:01 in the morning with a SWAT team, and guns pulled out, and they executed the eviction and then tried to block off the house, and ultimately did block off the house. Catherine was then forced to, she was not only housing herself, but she was housing her daughter and a few of her grandchildren. None of them had any place to go, so they were scattered. One of the children was sleeping with friends. The daughter had to go find another place to live with the younger children. And then Catherine ended up staying at a hotel for a month. So we were really at wit's end. However, what was interesting, and this will lead into the movement discussion we'll have, is that right after this happened, which caught local news by storm and made national news, is that elected officials started calling Take Back the Land and saying, you know, we want to work with you, we want to help you. It turned out they were trying to do a little bit of a hustle on us, but as a result of the attention that we got, as a result of the work we were able to do, we started getting attention. But in the Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, United States senators, both of their offices called and said they wanted to engage in negotiation. In the end, however, what happened in this particular case is that them calling, the senators calling, demobilized us. We said, okay, they're calling, we're talking to the senators, we don't need to do any more actions. We stopped doing actions, and it turned out it was a big hustle. So now, this woman's been moved out. We stopped doing actions because we were negotiating with the senators, and now this woman is stuck and out of gas. So this is the second video, is the exact same case from May 2011, so a little over a month later.
Well, it is not a sit-in. It's called a live-in. Forcibly evicted from her foreclosed home, a Rochester woman has moved back in. Catherine Lennon is now squatting in her old house, and she's doing it to send a message about foreclosures. Rachel Barnhart has the latest chapter on this story.
I don't have too much of anything, but
Catherine Lennon is back.
I'm living just almost like when we first got it, on the floor.
Forcibly evicted from her foreclosed house in the 19th Ward in March, on Sunday, Lennon moved right back in. She's now a squatter in the house that used to be hers.
It was very easy access, very easy access.
Lennon claims she's a victim of a Western New York foreclosure mill that's under federal scrutiny. But lender Bank of America said it has tried to work with her.
They more or less forgot about me. They robo-signed on me. They did all of this stuff to me. That's why I'm here now.
Lennon has the support of her neighbors and the group Take Back the Land Rochester. Take Back the Land has broken into several vacant houses in the city, moving in homeless people. This is one of the houses 13 Wham was allowed to enter last year. The occupants were evicted months later. Take Back the Land is hoping Lennon's case will be different.
We already have thousands of vacant homes in Rochester. Why create another vacant home? All the neighbors support her.
Since her eviction, Lennon says the bank offered her the house for $50,000, but would not provide financing. Lennon knows she's risking another eviction, especially since she's making her trespass public. But she wants to make a point.
Let them come and do what they got to do. Maybe this will get the message out. Maybe all of this stuff will help people.
In Rochester, Rachel Barnhart, 13 Wham News.
All right, so hopefully this gives you some idea of what Take Back the Land does. So we've been doing this, as I mentioned. You can open the first PowerPoint and run it as a good. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this since, some version of it since 2006. And then the specific version where we engage in two types of actions, that's all Take Back the Land does, is two things, is what we call land liberation, is where we identify vacant government-owned or foreclosed homes, we break into them and we move families in. We don't call that occupying land. The banks are occupying our homes. We're liberating them from the banks and for people. So we do land liberation and eviction defenses. So those are the only two things that we do, and these were examples of both of them, both successful and unsuccessful. We'll get to back to Catherine's story in a moment. But at some point when we were doing this, and as we started to go national, in fact, right around the time that this story was was unfolding a little bit before, we started taking a step back to think about what are we doing here? What are we actually trying to do? Is Take Back the Land the movement? Are we trying to get other people to join our movement? Are we joining another movement? What are we doing exactly? And as a result of a couple of actions, a couple of things that happened to us organizationally and nationally, we developed a movement model. So we'd like to share the movement model with you and what we're thinking about, how to think about movements, how to create movements, how to move movements, how to advance an agenda on a movement. So go to that one. So just in terms of what our political objectives are, of course, you can't have a movement. You can't really even have an organization unless you're really clear about what your objectives, why you're doing this. So for us, our objectives really are two. First is to elevate housing to the level of a human right. And second is to secure community control over land. This is what we're doing. So everything we do is going towards one objective or the other. And if it doesn't meet that objective, we try not to do it. And if it does meet that objective, we try to do it. All right? And then, of course, inside of those, or how you achieve each of those, there's many paths to achieving them and many steps to achieving them. And we're working on the steps and we're working on the paths. But that's ultimately where we're going. Elevating housing to the level of a human right and securing community control over land. The way we're doing that, the methods that we're employing in order to do that, is we are building a movement. We're trying to build a movement. This is where our initial thinking, now we really think of ourselves more as part of a movement than build. But we are building a movement. We don't think of ourselves as the movement, but we are helping to build a movement. And the movement has many different components to it, but one is Take Back the Land in particular, is not a national organization where we have local chapters, but rather a trans-local network. A network, not a central thing where the central organization tells the other spawns, so to speak, what to do, but a network of autonomous organizations that are engaged in the same work who are hooking up with one another. So we're building a translocal network. We believe that the movement has to be led by impacted communities. That means those who are most impacted by the crisis have to be at the lead of the movement. And we are direct action, or what we call positive action, focused. We don't think at this particular time in history that we are able to advance an agenda like ours, housing as a human right, community control over land, through lobbying or negotiating or simple advocacy work. We actually have to be engaged in positive action or direct action campaigns. That's the only way we're going to be able to move this. Right now, there are powerful interests, banks, speculators, developers, whoever, who are giving billions of dollars to, collectively, to politicians so that they can influence the way they make their decisions. Even if we had billions of dollars, I'm not sure I would advocate that we use it bribing elected officials, but we don't have billions of dollars. So what is our option? What we can't use our billions of dollars, but what we can use is our labor. And that's what happens through positive action and direct action campaigns, is we employ our labor. So anyway, that's what Take Back the Land is doing. But again, we took a step back and said, okay, this is what Take Back the Land is doing. What are we part of? What is the bigger picture? What is the movement? And as a result, again, of several incidents which happened, and our thinking through those incidents and thinking about what our objectives are, we developed this movement model. So the metaphor that we developed for movement building, or the movement that we are building and that we're a part of, is a spear. So Take Back the Land is not a nonprofit organization. We don't get any funding. So of course, we couldn't afford to hire a graphic artist to draw a spear for us. So we're stuck with the arrow that comes with the PowerPoint or the Google presentation thing. But this is a spear, believe me. So we use the spear as a metaphor for what it is that we do. And we have explanations of what all the different areas of the spear are and what they are. So in this, again, because of this unique time, we think that some of the most exciting work and some of the most vital work, which is vital right now, it isn't always vital, but it is vital right now, is some of the positive action or direct action work that's happening. It's doing a lot of things and enabling a lot of things. And that is what we consider to be movement area number one, and that's positive action campaigns. The tip of the spear, as it were, are these positive action campaigns of land liberation and eviction defense. Just so it's clear, area number one, because area number one is tip of the spear, doesn't mean it's more important than the other areas. It just has a particular function. So when you're using a spear, as we were researching this metaphor, when you use a spear, the tip of the spear, of course, has to be sharp and pointy. That is what you use to, when, for example, using a spear to kill an animal, that is the point that goes into the animal, that has to penetrate the hide of the animal. But the tip of the spear can't kill the animal. What kills the animals are the hooks underneath, right? But the tip of the spear is important because that's the part that has to gain entry. In the same way that's the way that it works for this particular, for the spear itself. In the metaphor of the spear, the positive action component is what creates political space. We're able to create political space in a way that we haven't been able to see, certainly in recent history. And we haven't been able to generate that kind of political space with lobbying and with our allies and friends in suits, et cetera. So we had as you saw in Rochester, had an incredible action, very exciting action in which we lost, but as a result, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's office and Senator Chuck Schumer's office and Representative for Rochester, Louis Slaughter's office, all three called us the next day and wanted to meet and wanted to work with us. We would never have been able to get them on the table if we weren't able to effectively, for a long period of time, block this and cost the city of Rochester tens of thousands of dollars that they spent just trying to evict this one family. It created incredible amounts of political space. So we engaged in this action and as positive action. However, it didn't take us too terribly long to realize that as exciting as this is, as interesting as this is, we could not move the agenda that we want to move just by doing positive action campaigns. Take Back the Land can do some amazing things and incredible things and exciting things. We cannot, however, just doing the things that we do as positive action, carry the ball across the goal line. We need other parts of the movement to take care of that job. And we realized that as a couple of other things happened. So we had the two incidents which took place, which helped us develop this model, actually. And both of them happened one happened in 2009, the other happened in 2010. The first action, although second in chronology, the first incident, although second in chronology, happened in Madison, Wisconsin. In May 2010, we called for a month of action where we had organizations around the country engage in these positive action campaigns. And some of the most interesting and high-profile work that year happened in Madison, Wisconsin. So in Madison, on 2 consecutive Mondays, they engaged in land liberation actions. Took over a house, moved in a family one Monday, and then the next Monday took over another house and did it more for a political show, but did it anyhow. Led the news every night in Madison for 4 nights in a row. Monday through Thursday, top of the news. Next Monday, the next Thursday, top of the news every night. The talk radios, so I went to Madison the second Monday. So I was there. Talk radio stations were talking about it. I went to put gas in the car. The people at the gas station were talking about it. We did a little door-to-door. We didn't even have to say Take Back the Land, Madison. Everybody knew exactly what the case was, right? So amazing action, incredible action. I go home several weeks later, like 6 weeks later or so, I get a call from Take Back the Land, Madison. And they said, you're not going to believe this. The mayor of Madison, Wisconsin just called and says, look, you guys made some very interesting points. You said that laws are protecting corporations instead of human beings. We'd like for you to come in, tell us which laws you think those are, and we'll take a hard look at changing them. They said, so what do we do? And I said, what? And so now, because of the action, the mayor of Madison wants to meet with us. And he wants to know what our demands were. And I was struggling and the only thing I come up with is we have to protest him. So our only way that we could relate to the mayor is to protest him or to demand that he doesn't evict the families. And we actually had no things. So the question from a movement building, and certainly from an organizational building point of view, was this. If we engage in a positive action campaign and we win, and the mayor calls and says, okay, what are your demands, what do you want, then what do we do? What happens if we win and the mayor says, what are your demands? So that then led us to our second movement area, which is public policy. So there's a whole series of public policy things that have to happen in order for us to get towards housing as a human right and gets towards community control over land. What is interesting, however, is that there is a number of public policy ideas and initiatives that are out there already that are doing some work. Some of them, to be quite frank, are horrible, and we wouldn't want them implemented. Some of them send us backwards. Some of them people think they're sending us forward, but they're not really doing what people think they're doing. And some of them are really very good and very progressive and advance the cause of justice, advance the cause of human rights, advance the cause, ultimately, of peace. But what was interesting is that the people who are in that policy realm can never get a meeting with the mayor or with Kirsten Gillibrand or with Chuck Schumer. So we have people who know what the policy things are, but they can't get in the room with the mayor. And conversely, we had a bunch of people who could get a meeting with the mayor or get a meeting with the senator, but when they ask us what our demands are, we have no idea what they are. Right? So this is a bad position for us to be in as a movement. So what we recognize is that we have to have, in order to have a successful movement, we can't just have one, we have to have both, right? But even more than that, the two areas, even though they're going to work in a complementary way, are actually two entirely different areas in a movement. So when we're talking about this is not an organization here. This is a movement. And each area would actually probably represent an organization, because the truth is the people who are doing the policy, the suits are not going to go breaking into houses just to get a meeting with the mayor. And the people who are doing area number one, the ones who are breaking into housing, it's a very self-selecting group. Those people really do not want to meet and negotiate with the mayor. They may say they do, but they don't. Believe me, they want to go to the mayor and they want to curse at him, but they don't want to go to the mayor and negotiate and talk about this thing. So we actually cannot, we can get attention and we can move ideas to area number one, but we can't actually change any policy through area number one. And we could get policy ideas through number two, but we can't get in the door with just number two. We have to have one and two working in concert. And this is a significant part of the movement model. The second incident that happened that helped us flesh out this movement model happened actually in Miami. We had a family that was foreclosed on, and they were evicted from their home. They spent the weekend living in a bread truck. And after they were evicted on a Friday, spent the weekend living in a bread truck, on the following Monday, much like Catherine Lennon, we moved them right back into the same home from which they were evicted. This family was caught in this whole scene was caught in the movie Capitalism, a Love Story. I don't know if anyone saw that. So that was featured there. And so we moved the family in. The family is still there today. So they've been there for 3 years and 2 months now. But 6 months after we moved that family back in, we were holding strong. They had no chance of getting them out. We had all kinds of community support. We had all kinds of national and international attention going to that family. There was no way the bank or the local police was going to be able to move them out. My cell phone rings 6 months later. The bank, U.S. Bank, is on the phone. They found my cell phone number. They called. They said, look, don't call the press. Don't protest. Don't, whatever. We want to give you the house for free. The only reason we're calling you is we want to know, who do we make the deed out to? Do we make it out to you, to the family, to take back out? Who do you want to make it out to? We'll put it in the mail tomorrow. So who should we make it out to? And I said, what? So we brought it back to the group, and I said, you're not going to believe this. The bank wants to give us the house for free. So it turns out, this you never know until you actually go through the experience, the people who want to break into houses do not want to be landlords. Like, they were offended at the idea that we would somehow own the place. And at the same time, the family who was there didn't want to take repossession of the house because they had a bunch of coding violations there, and they were afraid they were going to be immediately responsible for it, for those code violations. And also, politically, we didn't think that the solution to the problem was that we would create a movement that would then give people houses free and clear, individuals. It would just restart the problem again. Someone would offer them $100,000 for the house, they'd make $100,000, and that wouldn't actually produce low-income or affordable housing over a long period of time. So there's a number of reasons why we were never able to get that to move, and we did not, because we were completely stupefied. Even though we were doing this and we were claiming it, we never actually thought they would call and say, here, you can have the house. It never really, that never really occurred to us. So, but in a movement building sense, the question for us was this: if we engaged in a positive action campaign and we won, and the bank called and said, okay, we give up, the house is more trouble than it's worth, who should we make the deed out to? Then what do? What happens if we engage in a positive action campaign and we win, and the bank says you can have the house? That created then the third movement area, which we call the third way. We also call it alternative structures. It's more accurate to call it alternative structures, and certainly makes the movement model more universally applicable. So for us, the third way means the third way of controlling land. So now when you think about land control, you usually think about it one of two ways: private land ownership, so individual owns a house, a corporation owns a house, a bank forecloses on a house and owns it. Or the second way is public, which is a park or a post office or a government building or library, whatever that public way is, although public is increasingly becoming just a means to turn land to private land. Well, we think at the end of this particular historic period, we're going to move towards having this third way of land control, which is some kind of democratically controlled community land trust. We don't know exactly what that means right now. We don't think it's our job to figure that out altogether, but we do have some of the things which we'll talk about a little bit later. But so again, here you have a situation where we cannot possibly, right, go to the banks. We can't go to Bank of America and sit down and say, hey, you guys have all these empty homes. Why don't you give us, 1,000 of your empty homes? They would after they were done laughing, they would call security and they would have us escorted out of the Bank of America building. However, if we were to go into Bank of America and say, look, we right now are occupying 100,000 of your vacant homes, let's negotiate about the outcome of it, we'd be in a very different position, right? So the idea of this democratic and community-controlled land trust, first of all, there are community land trusts which exist now. Some of them do spectacular jobs, some of them do horrible jobs, but if we would need to move that. However, these community land trusts have not, by and large, been able to come in and say, there's all these vacant homes in these communities, we would take them on and we would turn them instantly into affordable housing this community needs. They haven't been able to do that. One of the reasons they haven't been able to do that is because they haven't had enough cash to buy them from the banks, even though the banks already got paid for them. So we have some people who are much similar to the way that we have some folks who are doing public policy work, but haven't been able to get a seat at the table. We have people who are doing community land trust work, but haven't been able to get some of the homes that they feel like they could have and to have an impact on the housing crisis. And yet, at the same time, those who are engaged in positive action campaigns right now are winning some amazing victories in terms of principal reduction, and now we think we're about to turn the corner with some of the handing the houses over clear and free. But neither one of these can work by themselves. Then each one of them is enhanced by the existence of the other one. It gives us two options in terms of victory, and it gives us a really strong leverage point in terms of what the direct action is. This is ultimately what a movement has to, the elements that a movement has to have in place in order to advance its agenda. We can't do it with one, we can't do it with the other. And again, we're probably looking at entirely different groups of people who are covered in each movement area. Because the kind of person who would do one is not necessarily the kind of person who would do the other. Now, this then raises an obvious question for us, which is, since these seem to be out there already, there's people who are doing positive action or direct action campaigns, there are people who are doing public policy work, there are people who are doing some community land trust or third way kind of stuff, whether or not it's exactly what we want is a whole other subject. So these things are kind of out there. What then, the question for us became, what is the difference between having a room where you've got a bunch of crap just laying on the ground versus a room where the chairs are in nice, neat rows and you have equipment pointing in the right direction and doing the things that it's supposed to do? What's the difference between a piece of steel and a spear? There has to be something that holds those things together, something that transforms it from just these elements that are floating around in space into something that is coherent and the whole thing is working together, moving towards a given objective. That thing then would be the fourth movement area, which we are calling the collaboration and facilitation space. And that would be then collaborating and facilitating among the three primary movement areas. This is a very tricky issue because there's a lot of mistrust, at least if not between 2 and 3, certainly between 1 and 2 and 1 and 3, where the organizers and activists don't trust the suits, and the suits don't trust or don't like the activists and organizers. So it's a very difficult proposition. So as difficult as it was to come up with this concept, it was even more difficult to actually make it work. But this is the challenge that we have to do. We have some of these things happening right now. The truth is no single organization could possibly do all of this, and we have organizations who have some level of competency in one area or another. We need to bring together the people who are interested in this work, who want to advance housing as a human right, and want to turn it into one cohesive movement. The job then of area number 4, collaborative facilitation space, is going to be 2. One is to provide collaboration and facilitation space for these 3 areas where they can talk with one another, where they can work with one another, and even if they have some trust issues, where at least they can engage and work together and let each other know about their work so that they can advance a common agenda. The second job of collaboration space is to provide support services, particularly for area number 1. And so the support services become important because area number 1, because the type of work that it does is going to be chronically underfunded, chronically under-resourced, and chronically need help. It's going to need legal support, it's going to need communication support, it's going to need all kinds of support, and someone needs to do that, and that job is ultimately going to fall, I think, to area number 4. So these then would be the 4 movement areas. These areas have to exist and have to be viable in order for us to move in a particular direction and push. Organizing, of course, would happen under area number 1. So we have these exciting actions. We need to organize underneath that, and it'll be mass participation. We have a whole bunch of other things about the metaphor. But those would be the 4. So what is this? So these are 4 areas. Positive action is area number 1. Public policy is area number 2. Alternative structures or third way is area number 3. And then collaboration and facilitation space is area number 4. So what does this look like then in actual real life? So this is the way that it's shaping up now. Of course, now we would add to Take Back the Land some of the Occupy groups, but particularly it would be the Occupy foreclosure working groups that are around the country. Some of them are called Occupy Homes, some of them are called Occupy Foreclosure Working, whatever they're called, whatever other area. And there's a growing number of other organizations who are engaged somehow, some way in this particular type of work, right? And then policy, the truth is right now we at least we haven't identified the policy partners who could move some of the really progressive policy work. We don't think there's been enough done in terms of what the policy needs to be to realize housing as a human right. Because I think the main reason is because probably as recently as 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, I don't think anyone actually thought we could achieve it in this country. Now that it's becoming much more of a real possibility, we are a little bit behind on the policy part. And then a few of the partners who we have who can do that, we've shifted them over to some of the other areas. Movement area number 3 is being primarily handled, although not exclusively, by National Economic and Social Rights Initiative, which is an organization out of New York, a human rights organization. They usually do policy stuff, but they've been really helping put together some of the concepts behind the Community Land Trust, which we'll share with you in a bit. And then the support services, we have a whole range of support services from the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Network, Ruckus Society, U.S. Human Rights Network, Center for Constitutional Rights, and International Alliance of the Inhabitants, among other groups as well, who are then providing support particularly to those organizations who are engaged in positive action, direct action, civil disobedience type work. So this is what the movement model, our movement model, looks like right now. So we'll do real quick, any clarifying questions, and then we have another piece that will do that. So 1 and then 2.
I just didn't quite catch how you summarize the third way.
How we summarize it?
Like, yeah, how would you?
Third way would be community land trust. Where does the land, if we win the land, where does the land go? Do we give the land back to the family? Do we give the land to the organization that liberated it, Take Back the Land, or Occupy? Who do we give the land to? Who gets the land?
In terms of the movement model, that's specific to just Take Back the Land, and it's not like a
Take Back the Land doesn't want it.
I mean, a third way in terms of any organization.
Yeah, right. This can be applied not only to Take Back the Land, this can be done nationally, and it can also be applied locally.
Another issue, any kind of any issue, yeah, but third way
So that's why I said it's better to use alternative structures, because if you use an issue besides housing, you can still talk about alternative structures, an alternative way of doing things, if you're talking about an issue there. Let me just say real quick also, for area number 4, which of course is Movement Catalyst, which is a nonprofit that we started as a result of Take Back the Land, the needs of Take Back the Land, and that's the nonprofit that I work for, just for, and of course Take Back the Land is not a nonprofit, it's not a 501c3. So here and then here.
Are these available on your website?
Not on the website, but if you, I'm going to make it available. In fact, I'm going to make it available to Stan. So if you guys get back in contact with the center, then they'll be able to get you. And there's a series of them, and Stan will have all of them. So you got to figure out how to do that.
The issue at the beginning is the fact that the city had to pay the police to do this. It cost them thousands of dollars. Is there? Could the city refuse to do that? What, because I'm thinking, getting the cities to stop doing the dirty work that costs them, and then the house is empty, and and they have to deal with all the problems, and the bank. So is that possible? Number one. Number two, when you do move people back in, do they pay the city taxes, property taxes on that, or is anybody?
Does who pay it?
Anybody.
When what happens?
When you move people back in.
Yes. No, we don't pay the taxes on it. No.
Okay. All right.
But that's because we don't have title to it. We don't have control over it. We don't have, yes, here and then we do.
Number 3, the third way. That seems very important. That's like a new class of property being created. It's more social property or community property. Can you say anything more about what you found?
We will. That's the next part. So let's get through this. That's the next part, actually. Okay, here and then.
What did you tell the mayor of Madison?
I'm sorry?
What did you tell the mayor of Madison?
We did not meet with them because we had no way of articulating demands. We literally didn't know what to say. It was a very strange position to be in. Believe me. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So it's one of those things, be careful what you ask for. Yes.
I'm a little tired after a couple of days of doing this stuff. I can't really concentrate on all this. Is this somewhere on YouTube?
Yeah, if you get in touch with Stan and the center, they will make it available for everyone. Yeah.
So recently, I'm thinking this winter, or some point, there was legislation that I think went through the Oregon houses, and it was, I think the Democrats probably pushed it through, to slow up the foreclosure process, and maybe stop that and had to have an arbitrator present. Is that helpful to this movement at all?
All right, so there's potentially in Oregon and in several other places there are attempts to slow down the foreclosure process and by introducing arbitrators or other kinds of things. This is not one of the things that Take Back the Land is concerned with, and I'll explain it two ways. One is that we don't want to, at least not us, I know there are people who do, we don't want to tinker with the specific rules of how foreclosures go. We want to change the way we relate to land itself. And we can't do that by tinkering around with the foreclosure rules. Right? So there are some people who are facing foreclosure who have been robo-signed, and we build these movements and we do these actions, incredible actions like this one, and say this family's been robo-signed and this is an illegal foreclosure and we're not going to stand for it at all. There's others who were not robo-signed, who were actually foreclosed on legally, believe it or not. I know it doesn't happen all that often, but what happens when that happens? Then what are we saying? Okay, go ahead and evict them? So that's not our position. Our position is not, where the I's dotted and the T's crossed. I mean, some cases it's way worse than that, so I'm not minimizing it. But is this person a human being, and therefore do they deserve housing? The second way I want to talk about that is I went a couple years ago to South Africa. Had an incredible opportunity to meet with the organizations that inspired the creation of Take Back the Land, in particular Abagali and the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign. When we got there, we had the same question over and over for everyone. If you're here in South Africa, what laws would you change now in order to prevent evictions from happening? Because they're doing eviction blockades all the time, et cetera. And radical people, almost 100% of them said, we wouldn't change any of the laws. There's no law that we'd actually change. The laws actually are pretty good. South Africa housing is a constitutional right, by the way. So they said we wouldn't change any of the laws. And it was just difficult for us to understand it. And then at some point, an epiphany hit us. The social movements in South Africa and the social movements in the United States are going in two exact opposite directions. In South Africa, the laws around housing and the laws around tenancy are so good that the job of the social justice movement is to compel the government to obey the law. In South Africa, there are almost no legal evictions, almost none. In fact, we heard about one case in particular where a guy was getting foreclosed on, was getting evicted from a place, and the landlord went to the court and said, I want this guy evicted, he hasn't paid in whatever amount of time. And they have a legal process inside where you have to go, the two parties have to go and talk. And it's your job in that process to put yourself in the position of the other person. They have a name for it. I can't remember the name for it right now. But, I'm sorry?
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation is not the name. There's a name of the idea that you have to put yourself in the other person's position. It's not that. But anyway, so they have to do that. So they go to that process. The landlord goes, this guy hasn't paid. The judge says, okay, go do the process. They come back, and the judge says, okay, what happened? The landlord says, this guy hasn't paid, and he said, then what happened? He said, this guy lost his job a couple months ago. He hasn't paid, so I would like to get evicted. And the judge says, it's obvious that you didn't put yourself in this man's position, because if you did, you would know that he lost his job and he would not have got it. And the judge ordered the tenant every day to go out and look for a job, and ordered the landlord had no right to evict him.
That's awesome.
Right? Can't even imagine. The law in South Africa was so good that the job of the social justice movement is to compel the government to enforce the law. In the United States, the law is so bad that the job of the social justice movement is to compel the government not to enforce the law. Because here we're having all these debates about whether something was signed or whether it wasn't signed or whether they were served properly, or all these, and I'm not, again, trying to minimize, but all these technicalities. But we don't want to win on technicalities. We want to win because this person is a human being, and as a human being deserves the right to housing. We want that to be our argument. We don't want the argument to be he signed on line 34 instead of 35. We want our argument to be this is a human being who cannot live on the street. So that's what we do. Okay, anything, clarifying question real quick before we go to the next part?
You never answered a question about whether the law, there's a law that compels the city to act.
Yes, of course the police are required to, in terms of the law, are required to enforce court decisions, and if the court decides that an eviction has to happen, then they have to do that. And of course, we would say that that's what we want to break. We also have a thought about how we could break that, but let me go on to the next thing. So let's go to the next PowerPoint, please. All right, we're going to go down. Not going to start from the beginning. You would start from, keep going. Start from victory demands. Okay. Can you start? Good. All right, so now we've seen eviction defenses suddenly explode throughout the United States in large part because of Occupy. Been amazing, amazing work. Other organizations have been doing it also, some for longer, some for shorter, some for the same time, but a lot of it is happening. The overwhelming number is happening either because of Occupy directly or because of organizations that have been inspired or freed up by Occupy. So we've been doing these eviction defenses, blocking evictions, and then when we win, we declare victory, and then we put the demands. And the demands have largely been, everyone has seen them, go to the next slide, has been around the family, sometimes organizational demands like drop the charges, but it's been around the family. And the demands for the family has always been, so far, has pretty much been the same. Give this family principal reduction. The family's paying $200,000, the house is only worth $100,000, drop it to $100,000, whatever it is. So we have these demands which are being made about principal reduction. We do have a concern about, I'm not gonna spend too much time about it right now, we don't think that principal reduction is an ambitious enough political objective. We don't think it is an ambitious enough demand to have right now. One of the reasons, of course, is that the banks just finished a settlement, and part of the settlement requires them to do principal reduction for families. So when we win one of these actions, they actually get credit for it in the settlement. So in a real way, they're not doing us any favors. They are merely fulfilling their obligation of settlement. But that's not the major point here. The point is that we've had these incredibly brave actions where we face off against the police leave, the bank sits down and negotiates, and we make a demand. They say, well, we want principal reduction for the family, right? Under this model, aside from the principal reduction limitation, which we think is a limitation, the other reason why principal reduction is a huge limitation is because principal reduction only applies to homeowners, right? So what if you have someone who is renting a place, it gets foreclosed on, they've made all their payments, sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't, and the place gets foreclosed on. We're saying we can't help you because you don't get principal reduction because you're not a... The other thing is it only helps homeowners that are employed. Even if you get your mortgage dropped in half, that just means it's half as much as the mortgage you can't afford as it was before, but you still can't afford the mortgage because you don't have a job. Right? So we need to have some demands which can help renters, which can help public housing residents, and which can help street homeless people, right? So, but anyway, so we win a victory, we make the demands. The demand is, let's reduce principal on the mortgage, and we are winning that more and more. And that's great, we're supportive of that. We don't think it goes far enough, but in general, we're supportive of it. However, under this model, even aside from the principal reduction issue, if we engage in 1,000 campaigns, think of the number of campaigns we've had here. You know, you have 5 or 10 or whatever, 1,000 campaigns would be a lot, talking to families, getting 1,000 of them. If we engage in 1,000 campaigns and we win 100% of the time, we would still only help 1,000 people. We would still help 1,000 people. I mean, this would not be an effective use of resources. So we right now have a single track demand structure. We need to build a dual track demand structure. So the second track then would be, in addition to the demands of the individual family, would then be the policy demands or even the alternative structures demand. What laws, specific laws, even looking at it from the narrowest point of view, from the reformist point of view, what specific laws made it possible for this family to get evicted, and how do we change those laws? We have to start making these policy demands and even alternative structures to hand the house over to the community land trust. We have to make these policy demands in addition to the demands that are made just for the individual family. We must start developing, right now organizations are thrilled with it. 2, 3, 4 years ago, if an organization would win outright after an eviction offense, principal reduction, that would be like national news. It would be huge, it would be great, everyone would be applauding, and rightfully so. Today it's happening, people are still applauding. My guess is that in a year, we're gonna be woefully unimpressed with that, because now we're able to do that, we've established that. What are we doing next? How are we actually doing something other than winning one individual family, knocking off $100,000 off their principal? How are we doing this to impact broader communities more than just one individual family who we're helping? So we think part of that is going to be the policy work. The other part of it, of course, is going to be alternative structures. So can we go to the next? So this is what we, yeah, good, start it from. And go to the next one. So we talk about housing as a human right and community control over land. So this is what we are moving towards in terms of democratically controlled community land trusts. This is what it will potentially look like. Go to the next one. So right now you have, again, the three means of land, two means of land ownership. One is private, which is a bank, corporation, speculator, or homeowner. The second one is public, a government center, post office, et cetera. And then the third one now we're talking about the third way, which would be some kind of community control, where instead of a wealthy developer coming into Eugene, who's sometimes never even been here, and saying, you know what we need right here? We need a Starbucks and a jewelry store. We would have the people who live in the community say, this is what we need, and then that is the thing that will be built. And that can only happen when there's community control over land. So what would that look like for the third way? Some kind of structure that would ensure that you have community-based decision-making is actually the primary concern here. There are community land trusts right now. In fact, the National Community Land Trust Association is based out of Portland. But a couple things. Let's look at what it looks like specifically. I know we're running out of time. So this is what it would potentially look like. We engage in an eviction defense. We negotiate with the bank. We say we want the house. The land itself, the land underneath the house, would go to some kind of democratic community partnership, where possibly organizations, possibly, go to the next slide, possibly organizations, possibly just individuals that live in this area, from one street to another street, one avenue to another avenue, whatever geographical area made sense, would then control the land through some kind of partnership where everyone would have a stake. And you could have members and a board, but that group would make decisions about what happens on the land. And the important elements here is that this partnership would restrict resale of land here, so that it wouldn't be easy just to resell. That means when it is resold, it will be affordable for the next group. But the land itself wouldn't be resold, even if the house potentially could. And then we'd have a ground lease, a lease for the land with whoever was either another community partner or someone else. In this particular model, go to the next one, then the house would be owned by an entirely different entity. In this case, actually, it's the same entity. So the partnership, go to the next one. And that would be, the residents would have to be a member of that, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be then the land would be owned by the partnership, and the house would be owned by the partnership. There's a second model that we're using, and this is the one which we're applying here. Go to the next one. So in the video that you saw where Catherine Lennon, who engaged in this eviction defense, lost, and then we moved her back into her house. She's been there since May of last year. We are right now negotiating with Bank of America to get the house handed over, clear and free, not principal reduction, to a democratically controlled community land trust, which is a 501c3. So the bank would get a tax write-off, the community land trust would get the land, the whole thing, the land of the house, for free. So that would be the land would be owned. After we get it, then we would split it. The land would be owned by the community land trust, and that would be the same thing with our restrict sale, et cetera. And then the house on top would be either by a homeowner or a co-op or nonprofit. In this case, it would be the homeowner. So Catherine would own the house, but she would not own the land. And that would mean then that she would be responsible for the repairs and the taxes and improvement on the house. But the restrictions would be that she can't use that land to make a profit. She can't rent it out. She wants to leave, she can leave, but she can sell it, but she can't rent it out. She can't be an absentee landlord or anything like that. She gets it for cheap because she's going to use it as housing, not use it as an investment. And then when she resells it, if she wants to resell it, if she wants to sell it, she can't sell it at the market price. She has to sell it for below the market price, at a price partially determined by the community partnership. That way, look, the community is going to save her house, so the community has to get something out of it. And what we want out of it is that we get permanently affordable housing. Not that she gets it for cheap and then is able to resell it for as much as she can, but that she actually gets it for cheap and others get it for cheap as well. All right, so that's what we have in mind in terms of the democratically controlled community land trust, and that's what we are moving towards right now in a growing number of our campaigns, and eventually it's going to be all of our campaigns. This is what our demand is going to be, that the houses get handed over to a democratically controlled community land trust. We can only do this, however, with the entire model. Take Back the Land by itself cannot do this, cannot accomplish it, and we don't think that this can be accomplished without groups like Take Back the Land and groups like Occupy Foreclosures. So that's it. Let's do questions real quick for the time we have. All right, yes. NESRI, oh, NESRI, National Economic Social Rights Initiative. They are a human rights policy group out of New York. and they're the primary force behind working on some of the community land trust stuff. We also have we developed a wiki. Again, I'll make it available to Stan, that gives all kinds of more information you could ever possibly use on community land trusts. By the way, while the housing boom was still taking off, right before it busted, in 2007, the Minneapolis, Minnesota federal branch of the Federal Reserve released an article talking about how housing prices are skyrocketing as a result of the boom. And the Minneapolis, Minnesota Federal Reserve said that they see one of the possible biggest solutions to the shocking rise in housing prices are community land trusts. Yes?
There's been some talk about dealing with a lot of empty foreclosed houses as a risk to the general welfare, and that public agencies can take them by eminent domain. Have you looked at moving these houses into some sort of public housing organization?
So this is one of the internal debates we have. Does it go to public housing or does it go to community land trusts? We think that there should be a push to get some of this moved to public housing. The biggest problem for us is that we don't trust the government to handle these houses. They have not only royally screwed up the economy generally, but the local governments around the country are actively demolishing public housing. So what we're concerned is that we would go to them and say, we want you to eminent domain these places. They would eminent domain them and then turn around and sell them to speculators for dirt cheap, who would then turn around and resell it at high profits to families. And that means that even though the families could buy them, assuming that they could, even if the families could buy them, they would not get them for cheap. It would just become another expensive way for families to get it, but it would be a boon for developers, which is, and some version of that is happening right now, by the way.
I didn't get the thing about the renter. What's the renters?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that?
They own the house but not the land. The land's in a trust.
Is that what you mean? Well, they could in terms of the renters.
Yeah.
So when we get a house, it could be used in one of several ways. It could either be leased out to a nonprofit organization who can then rent it to someone as affordable housing, or the top can be actually purchased, what a lot of community land trusts operate as. The house could be used as a individually owned home. But then there'll be restrictions about how much it could be resold. So it could either be rented or it could be sold. That would be a decision the local group would have to make. Yes?
So, but actually, one thing that surprised me when I read about it was that a whole other aspect of the housing crash was that people who were living in rented housing, if the landlord couldn't pay the mortgage and the house got foreclosed, then the renter was the one that suffered. The renter is the one that got kicked out. And the high proportion of housing crisis was that.
Yes.
The renters get kicked, and often with no warning, because they didn't know.
Yeah. And that happens particularly in big cities where a disproportionate number of people live in apartments or renting apartments, and the apartments were over leveraged. So that is happening all over the place. That's exactly right. And that's one of the limitations, again, when organizations are engaged in these eviction defenses, but their only demand is principal reduction. That does not help renters at all. And we were talking a little earlier about racial justice. Something like 67% of whites in the United States live in a home that they own or their family owns. It's never been, in the history of the United States, there's never been more than 49.5% of blacks who have lived in homes that they own themselves, they or their families have owned. So if we go and we build a whole movement and the principal demand or the principal objective is to get principal reduction, it would disproportionately help higher income whites. And even when it goes down the income scale, it would disproportionately help whites and disproportionately not help. It would, even if you were to give every single homeowner in the United States relief, it would never help the majority of black people because the majority of black people don't live in a home that they own. Anything else?
Can you talk about what it takes to create a community land trust?
So community land trust, what it takes to create a community land trust, there are several different ways of doing it. Several states, including Oregon, by the way, has a community land trust as an official legal entity. And so you could create a community land trust by filing community land trust papers. I think it's 30 states that have that, and then the other states do not have a legal entity. I mean, you can create something and call it that. But you can also create a corporation that operates by those rules. And that gives you a little more flexibility because then you can make exactly the rules that you want rather than using the rules that are already provided. We think that is that's the part that's one of the most flexible. We don't really have an opinion about which way that should be done. In Rochester, just for the record, what we started, that we do have a land trust there. The nonprofit movement Catalyst created believe it or not, a limited liability corporation. It was the quickest and the fastest way of doing it, even though we were appalled at the idea that we were going to be creating a limited liability corporation. And in fact, when we did it, we were just shocked at how little information they required. And when we had a lawyer who told us, look, you can create a community land trust if you want, but the cheapest, quickest, and most flexible way you can do it is by doing an LLC. And when we researched the LLC ourselves, we found some YouTube videos of this lawyer who does things, and he had a video called Why I Created LLC. And the lawyer said in the YouTube video, there are many reasons why you would want to create a community land trust, but an LLC, in order to own property. He said, for example, concealing ownership of the property. And he looked in the camera and he said, you don't want your tenants knowing how much property. There's a bunch of people who you may not necessarily want knowing how much property you own. Your tenants, your creditors, the government. And I'm like, they're actively using these LLCs to make sure the government doesn't know that they own this land, and lawyers are telling them to do that. So anyway, but saying we had to go through a whole debate about even using an LLC just because that has been used for so much corporate dirt. But because it was made so pliable that it was created in such a way that LLCs could allow corporations to do anything, it also allowed us to do anything with it. And so, of course, we're going to make ours extremely transparent. We already have. And we're going to have it run exactly what we want, which is that we have a local committee which makes decisions about how the land is used. And in fact, even though in order to confer 501c3 status on the land trust, which means then that the bank could hand it over to a 501c3 land trust and get a tax credit for it, you can write the rules so that the owner doesn't have any power over the corporation that it owns. And the reason they do that, of course, is they can put fake owners in front of you. You can never find out who the owner is. So the community would actually control the way the land is used, not the organization that technically owns the LLC. But we think this is one of the most, of course, you need to know about how to do that, but this is one of the most flexible and easy areas. We don't really care what vehicle we're in. If we can get there by foot, we can get there by bike, we can get there by red car, blue car, it doesn't make a difference to us. We just want to make sure that we get there.
So now, the foreclosed people, when you have the land trust, do they automatically become members of the land trust?
I'm sorry, I need to say it one more time. I'm going to jump here.
So the people who have been foreclosed on that have been saved by the organization, do they automatically become a member of the land trust?
Well, they could. They wouldn't be the only ones who'd be the members. There would be other members too. So you can define membership for the land trust any way you want. We can either do institutional membership or any way we want. But one of the ideas is to do institutional membership, have community organizations be part of the land trust. We could also do it geographically, which is the way most land trusts are done, which is say that everybody who lives between this street and that street, this avenue and that avenue are members, and then those members elect the board. And then the members make some decision, the board makes other decisions. There's all kinds of different ways we do that. And then what we would do, what's done in most land trusts, and we of course would do, would be that the residents of the units would automatically be members of the board, and or we'd have some kind of tiered voting. So like everybody who lives in the neighborhood gets one vote, but if you live on the property, you get 3 votes, for example. That way, you get extra power by living on the property. So there's many ways to set that up. But yes, that is where we want to go with it. We want to say, look, we will help you, but we're not just going to help you so you can get a house and turn around and sell it the next day. And I think this is going to happen pretty soon, where there's going to be a family who's going to be helped by one of these anti-foreclosure groups. We're going to stop an eviction. We're going to get the family the house either for free or for really cheap, and they're going to turn around the next month and they're going to sell it and they're going to make a killing, and people are going to be kicking themselves. And then the next family is not going to be able to afford the rent, the mortgage that they just got this thing because they overpaid for it, and then they're going to get evicted for it. We would have done no social good whatsoever. In fact, we would just reset the clock in order to help the boom happen again. So I think eventually that's going to become a requirement of participation here, although we are nowhere near that yet.
You may have just answered this, but so can you have a land trust that includes houses that are dispersed, or do they have to be in one general area?
Yes, you can. You can have a land trust with houses. That's not the way it's generally done. Generally, land trusts own a contiguous piece of land, but you can have one with disbursement, and this is the kind of alternative way of thinking about stuff. This generally is not done, but I think this is the time that we need to start thinking about stuff like that.
Wouldn't it be a separate one for each?
Well, we would do a land trust for every community. Like, we wouldn't want the land trust that is operating in Rochester to be the exact same land trust that operates in Eugene. Wouldn't make sense because you don't have local. Say again?
A city or a town or something.
Yeah, it could be a small city or a town, but it would probably be a little more narrow than that. But it would just depend on what the local community wants. People want a citywide, great. If people want much smaller than citywide, great, whichever way you want to do it. That's certainly not going to be our business to tell that.
As a limited liability corporation, who is liable for principalities and the land itself?
We would.
If we were to be sued, or
that's going to be part of the agreement that would happen with the on the top portion. It would, if the same group that controls the land also controls the housing, then it would be the group that whatever that group is. In the case where you have individual home ownership, the predominant national model is that the homeowner is responsible for all of those things. And the homeowner gets the house for cheap and has to resell it for cheap, and it's not an investment. In fact, it's a pretty bad investment. If you want to make a killing off of housing, then that's not the way to do it. But in exchange, you get relatively inexpensive housing. Yes?
I don't understand what the benefit of an individual owning a house under these restrictions, what the benefit is. They're really a renter.
Well, the benefit would be two things. One is psychological. There are people who want to own their own home, and that's what they want, and great, so you own your own home. But you're not going to make a killing off of it. The other benefit is because they do own the home, they would be able to do all kinds of things to it that you wouldn't necessarily do as a renter. You wouldn't have to call every time you want to paint the walls, or you wouldn't have to do this, that, or the other thing. You would have to get permission before making expansions to the house. Like if you wanted to do improvements, actual physical improvements, you'd have to get permission from the owner of the land, which would be the community land trust. But the benefit would be that you would get very inexpensive housing. Like, why do people join co-ops when they get a thing in? They don't get to do all the things that they want. They get some, because it's way cheaper to live in a co-op than it is to live in either in a condo or just to rent. So that's why this is not a good investment. If the idea here is that you want housing to appreciate in a way that you can become wealthy off of housing, this is not the idea at all for you. But the balance of that is when housing is not a commodity, then more people have access to it. In this case, we want everybody to have access to it.
Yeah, I mean, owning a house is a big responsibility. So if you don't get that benefit of an investment,
yes, it is a big responsibility. And the reality is not everyone wants that responsibility, and some people want to rent. And that's why we have the two models which we showed, one of which would just be would be renters who would have both. Yes.
So once the land is in a land trust, there's no taxes?
There are taxes, yes. Although in some places, apparently in Oregon, when nonprofits own land, they don't have to pay taxes on it. It's not the same with every state. But then that would significantly reduce the price then. There still are property taxes. And in the instance where there's a homeowner, the homeowner would be responsible for the property taxes, which is the way that it happens throughout the United States right now. And in the instance where the same organization owned the land and the improvements on the land, then that organization would also be responsible for the taxes, and the rent would have to somewhat reflect that at least. Yes?
So, several things I wanted to say. So, I live in a mobile home, in a mobile home park, which bears a lot of similarities. So I don't own the land.
Yes.
I rent the land. I own the structure. So I'm responsible for everything on the structure. I had to get a new roof, I got it painted, if the water breaks, I had to replace it, my washing machine broke, So, but my property taxes are low because the structure isn't worth that much. It's not a real house. It doesn't keep up with the real estate market, which to me, in my time of life, doesn't matter. So I get my own house that I control, how I take care of it. My housing costs are cheap, my taxes are cheap, my insurance is cheap. I picked a place that's owned by a church, so they won't sell the land out from under it. So I can live there as long as I want. And so to me, there's a lot of benefits. I got off the real estate wheel, but I have losing the investment value of a house, it is a real loss for some people, but for some people it isn't. I mean, I think I'm better off economically in my situation than I would be if I owned a house. I'd have higher taxes, higher insurance. You know, I might make some money at some point, but what am I going to do with it? Buy a bigger grave?
Good, very good. Yes.
I think one way to look at this is that we're talking about a different social model and understanding it in a different way. And not only are you talking about the goal of affordable housing, but you're doing that in the context of building community. And it's really important to say the goal here is to build a community that's taking care of one another so there's nobody displaced in this process. And so it's true that it's not an investment, but it's also true that you're much more secure embedded in the community than you are on your own as an individual.
So I think it's really important, and this is one of the things that we talk about internally all the time, but we don't know yet how to turn it into a model that we can put into a PowerPoint. How do we put community into this model? You know, how do we put that? But that actually ends up being the real value. If the entire community has a say in what happens on the land, then you have a say in what happens on the land, and you want to have that say, and you want to, then you have some kind of interest in it, and you know, you take pride in it. So I think that is probably the most significant part, way more significant than almost any of these other things. It's just difficult to talk about how that is in a mechanical model.
Yeah, to piggyback off of those last 2 points, I think one of the biggest problems with the financial crisis and the way like our economy has been structured for the last 30 years is that people do see housing as an investment more than a home. And I was wondering if there are any models where this has happened in a neighborhood where foreclosure is not the motivating part, where it's just there's a land trust within a community that sees housing as a human right. Are there like any instructive models around the country that we can learn from or do some research on?
Well, the biggest and best known is called the Champlain Community Land Trust, and that's in Vermont. One of the founders of it is Senator Bernie Sanders out of Vermont. And it's considered to be the largest and most successful land trust, and it has real caps on how much you can resell property for. And so that the housing there consistently doesn't sell, that doesn't turn over that often, but consistently when it does, sells for way below market value. And the same is so with co-ops, and co-ops are generally done as community land trusts, with one entity owns the land and another entity owns and controls the improvements on top. Let me do it here and then here.
Is there a way a homeowner could offer to say, hey, will you help and own my house as
Yes.
a land trust?
So Catherine Lennon did that, and we're trying to expand on that. Yes, so there are ways of doing that. We're trying to finalize this model. But yes, we want to create that space. We're not quite there yet. My guess is that we will be there in June or July of this year. So if you're interested, know anyone who's interested, please give your information. I think we'll be there in June or July of this year. That is our projection right now, but we need to make this one happen with Catherine Lennon first. But we're very interested in that happening, and we think people will do that because they recognize the value of building community over a long period of time and committing to having affordable housing in their communities. Yes.
So when a home is on a land trust and it goes up for sale and there's a cap for how much it can sell, how do you eliminate discrimination? I mean, how do you decide who gets to buy that house if it's inexpensive and there are many people in the market for it, and you have a community who has a certain, they've established a certain way of life and a standard, and they want to maintain that, and how do you choose who gets to buy it?
Well, I mean, I think it happens in the same way that all other transactions happen. I mean, obviously you have to have rules against out-and-out discrimination. And we have to, I think one of the benefits of this model is that we're presuming here, if we're doing some level of community organizing around it, if we're doing some level of organizing, that we would address issues of racism, classism, sexism, and homophobia, which I think are going to be the ones that are going to dominate the areas where we're going to have discrimination. But it would happen like everything else. When co-ops go up for sale or for rent, they're just flooded with requests to move in because they're so much cheaper than the other housing. And I'm sure discrimination does go on there. We need to figure out models mechanisms through which we can make sure that that doesn't happen. I don't know exactly what those would be offhand, but we do need to do that. Yes, here.
How do the tax assessors assess community projects like that? And do they and tax people? I mean, is it at the regular rate as other properties, or is it a lower rate because they know it's a co-op and it can't be valued?
So I don't know the technical way of if they actually assess it in a way differently, but if you look at tax assessments of any county anywhere, you see the assessment is made up of two parts, the land and the improvements, every assessment. And I think that would be the same way that it would be done here. I don't know if they assess it differently because it's a land trust versus because it's just a regular house and they just do the two anyhow. But where I think you really are going to see the benefits is when you have those resale, because like property appraisal is based largely on what the recent home sales are in that area of similar homes. So if you had homes that are selling for $200,000, $300,000, then suddenly you sell a land trust house for $75,000. Not only does it keep your taxes low, but it's going to reduce housing prices all across the board. And here we have a huge opportunity to do that with literally millions of vacant homes out there. If we were able to put a significant chunk of those, if not all of those, into community land trusts, it would drop housing prices across the board, because we could then have such a critical mass of new affordable housing that we could force prices from other places to come down. Who would pay $250,000 for a two-bedroom house somewhere when they can get one for $50,000 or $60,000, or the rental equivalent? Yes.
Well, and talking about her question, as far as how do you decide who gets what, or how do you avoid discrimination? I would think in the community land trust it would also be based on maybe needs, like say maybe somebody's working, but they're working a minimum wage job, but they can't afford a house. So I would think it would be based on things like that, like on need or family. A large family might be making $40,000, but they have 7 kids and they can't really afford a house on their salary.
So many co-ops in big cities, I know several in New York, and there's several in Washington, D.C., where I live as well, that have income requirements, and that is that your income cannot exceed a certain amount. So that's one of the ways that they deal with the crushing amount of things. But I do think we need to have a check to make sure that we don't create these co-ops, these inexpensive co-ops, land trusts, and inexpensive housing, and they're just all filled with wealthy people who now have cheap rent, and then everyone else is still left out to the force of the market. Again, I don't know exactly how we would do that, but that is something that we're going to figure out on an ongoing basis, I think. Yes.
I just want to check, but I'm assuming that within this model and framework, you would be protecting the future as well, because I could see some speculator in sheep's clothing coming in and saying, oh yeah, let's.
Right. Well, so we have in the, if you look at the land portion of the model, restricts resale, meaning in many instances when community land trusts come into being, it explicitly states as part of the charter, or it does a restrictive covenant on the deed itself, stating that this land can never be sold. And certainly if we arrange it so that no one who is a member or a board member there can financially benefit from the sale, then it really eliminates the need for that to happen anyway. I think that's going to have to be an integral part, is that you cannot have resale happening over here. So here and then here.
That's an interesting point. It kind of flies around with what we've been talking about all day, today, and yesterday. And I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, is we're going to get some pushback on this. If all of a sudden these corporations that have billions of dollars worth of land are already starting to see the value of their assets going down. Are you seeing any pushback from that? I thought I heard a NPR story the other day about a governor, I don't remember what state, that was putting $10 million into his budget for bulldozing housing. Is that kind of a reaction to this?
Well, that has happened in a lot of places. And of course, when they're bulldozing housing, what they're trying to do is manipulate supply and demand. So the reason why some housing prices are dropping is because there's so many vacant homes, which just drops the price of every other home. So in Detroit, almost as a matter of course, they just demolish homes. And there's several cities now in Ohio which are doing the exact same thing. And they're just demolishing the homes, knowing two things. One is it'll suppress supply and therefore increase the value of the homes that remain, without solving the housing crisis, by the way. And then the other thing is it's gonna force people who eventually buy those lots to then build a new house. So those are going to be some dual impacts. I think that's one of the pushbacks. We haven't gotten pushback yet because we are not far along yet down this path.
So is that the corporation manipulating the government to keep their values up?
Yes, of course. Yeah, the government has no real inherent interest in doing that. Their interest is in serving the needs of the corporation. Yes. Okay, so here and then.
What about inheritance of, say, a house that's owned in this way?
Mm-hmm. So if the house is owned on the top, then it can be inherited. It can be bequeathed and inherited in the same way that. But then the children can't turn around and sell it for as much as they want. They could sell it, but then they have to sell it for whatever the cap was.
Sell it, but not for as much as they want. So if they inherit it and they don't want it, then they get a
Right.
modest amount.
And the other thing that happens is that the land trust will get right of first refusal. So they'd get the first shot at buying it for whatever the agreed upon price is. And then if the land trust didn't want it, then they could sell it to whoever they want, but they could not make a killing off of it. They would still have to go by the same formula. Yes?
There was a move here in Eugene at one point, I think NEDCO, which is a neighborhood organization working on housing issues, was exploring having a land trust here. Does anyone know whether that exploration or some exploration about a local land trust is still going on, or has it got to start again?
Anyone know? Nope.
Oh, Madison Meadows is a land trust, isn't it, from the community?
What is?
Madison Meadows?
Yeah.
Madison Meadows?
The wildlife area. Community, the land was bought by people in the community, but there's no housing on it.
There's no housing. So the land trusts take many different forms. A couple things, land trusts take many different forms. There are land trusts that just preserve forest, for example. The other thing is that we're talking about housing here because there's a housing crisis, but we have our eye on taking over and doing the same kind of thing with vacant land, where on top, instead of having housing and renting out the housing, we then lease it out to grow food on the top.
I've noticed there's a check built into the community land trust model that's partly reflected in the name community land trust, partly reflected in the language behind it. And then basically, by calling it a community, by saying something is owned by a community land trust, that implies that before it's going to be used, or before the land is going to be used, or before the use of the land is going to be changed, there's got to be some conversation about it. Basically, using this model is reinforcing discussion before actually.
Yeah, so the community land trust obviously, as controlling the land, would then have a say on what happens on top of the land. And so would say, okay, we're going to build a shopping center here, we're going to build a daycare center here, we're going to build housing here, we're going to grow food here, whatever the decision would be made. But of course, would not micromanage then the housing on the top. Yes?
Well, one last comment here. Because it's a trust as well, it means that the community that owns it has a fiduciary obligation to maintain the body of the home or the trust itself as well. You can't see it dwindle down or damaged. So there's two of them. It's community and it's holding the trust where you're acting in trust for the community.
Let me say there's a couple of community land trusts that are out there that own huge swaths and then several homes on those swaths, where they base your land lease, in other words, what you have to pay in order to have your house on top of that land, renting out the land as you talked about with the mobile home, base their land lease on income. So everyone voluntarily, so that they don't do the check, everyone voluntarily reveals what their income is for the year, and those who have lower income pay lower land rates and therefore lower rent, and those who have higher income pay higher and therefore subsidize those who are of lower income.
Two of the issues that have kind of come up, one, how do you select people, and another one that you brought up earlier in one of your examples, a home in fact had so many code violations and whatnot that it maybe wasn't habitable. You will likely run into many of those types of homes. And in my community, the local Habitat for Humanity, instead of building new homes, is rebuilding and retrofitting existing abandoned and foreclosed homes. So those are two issues that you might collaborate with Habitat for Humanity.
So 2 issues. One is how are the homes, how are people selected to go into the homes? And the second is how are places rehabbed, et cetera. And the first one, how are people selected, that is entirely up to the community. And I think that each community process would be different. Not each one. I think there's probably going to be, 4 or 5 different models. But then the community has to decide what their model is about. I'm certainly not going to say you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. Secondly is in terms of rehabbing. This is actually, I think, the most exciting area of this whole thing. Let me say, before I go on that, let me say real quick about Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity uses this model. So if you buy a Habitat home, Habitat owns the land and you own the house. However, we want this to mean long-term affordability, which means that the first family buys it for cheap, and then when they're ready to sell, they sell it for cheap. Habitat does not have that model. Habitat, you buy it for cheap, and you can sell it for whatever you want, which was a major problem during the housing boom because people bought a house for $50,000, $60,000 in 2003, and in 2006, they would resell the house for $200,000, $300,000, right? But I think that has some real problem. But the biggest problem inside of that is not only that the second family didn't get it for cheap, the first family got this, but Habitat has a cap on how much the homeowner can make from it. So homeowners would then get their home for $50,000 in 2003, they would sell it for $250,000 in 2006, and they would get a check for $3,000, and Habitat would get a check for $200,000. Yes, there was a lawsuit in Miami filed about it, and the attorneys were. So I think Habitat's model is not very good in that respect. Although they do great work in terms of fixing up houses and things like that, I think their model is the worst of all worlds because the family not only, the second person who buys it not only doesn't get it for cheap, but then the first family doesn't even get the one benefit of what homeownership is. So we get no benefits from that. Although it's a great model for Habitat because they get the in-between money. So the rehabbing here, so let's say we take over 100,000 homes. Not all of them are going to be in great condition. Let's say we get 100,000 homes handed over to us. What are we going to do with that? We're going to be in a very similar situation as Take Back the Land was when we had a meeting with the mayor and we didn't know what to say, or the bank called and we didn't know what to say. Let's say they hand us 100,000 homes tomorrow and they have to be fixed up. We have some major questions to answer. One is, how are we going to pay for these things to get fixed? And then who is going to actually do the fixing? And this is where I think it gets really exciting. We're somehow able to get 100,000 homes. I think instead of going to, let's say we go to Bank of America, they give us 100,000 homes. Instead of going back to Bank of America and asking them for the money to rehab the homes that they just gave us, we need to go back to the community and say to the community, you need to fund this. I think we could do that in a couple of ways, but I think the most promising way would be to go to the major unions and say to the major unions that you allow your members to put their money, get money taken out of the check and sent to the stock market. Members of unions are now giving money of their retirement money to into the stock market and into the same companies which screwed them over and same companies who drained all of the value out of their retirement. We need to be able to say to the unions, we want you to offer your members on a voluntary basis the opportunity to invest in democratically controlled community land. And you put that money in, we use it to fix the home, we pay you back with interest, but then that way workers would be funding the democratically controlled community land trust and the building up of these huge number of houses. And then the second part of that then would be, is that we would then get an apprenticeship program where unionized workers would work to fix the houses up, would have apprentices who they teach to fix the housing up, and we would redo the houses not just like new, but we would do them like new in a green way. Solar panels, ways that make ecologically sustainable building sense in ways that it can operate like that. So I think those are going to be some of the exciting opportunities we have appearing around the corner here when we are able to acquire homes more than just one at a time, but in huge, huge numbers. We have time for a couple more? Okay, yes. Would you say that? Okay. Okay, one more. Any more? Okay, so we'll make this presentation. There's a few others available, so if you guys are signed up and make the request, the center will have to figure out exactly the mechanics of it, but if you get in contact with the center, then you'll be able to get access to several of these PowerPoints as well as the wiki that we have on Community Land Trust.
you.